All right, now we will turn to our conversation, Land and Lineage. It's a two-part conversation about the role of arts in creating spaces of belonging and the role of cultural institutions in engaging communities for a more just and environmentally friendly future.
We don't have time for full bios because of the long, illustrious, and successful careers of the folks on this panel, so I'm going to give a very short version. We have Amanda Williams, is a crowd favorite, and a visual artist based in Chicago and MacArthur Fellow. Her work investigates color, race, and space while blurring the conventional line between art and architecture. She's also a member of AIRIE's National Advisory Committee. Cornelius Tulloch is a Miami-based interdisciplinary artist and designer. He was a 2022 AIRIE Fellow and is currently serves as AIRIE's creative director. The Reverend Houston Cypress is from the Otter Clan of the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida and is the co-founder of Love the Everglades movement. He's an artist, an AIRIE board member, and part of AIRIE's National Advisory Committee as well. We have Milton Curry, a leading critical theorist and architectural designer. He's the dean of the USC School of Architecture, currently at the Harvard for some time, another year. Former dean at USC. Somebody needs to update their Wikipedia page. Okay. Alexandra Cunningham Cameron is a Hintz Secretarial Scholar at Cooper Hewitt. This is the Smithsonian Design Museum in New York City. And taking the place of Tatiana Muarbez, who could not join us due to an illness, is Ayoka Wiles, Director of Culture and Art with the Open Society Foundations. Welcome, everyone. So glad that you could join us today. So, Amanda.
Yes.
Your work as an artist explores the complex ways that value, both cultural and economic, intersects with race and in the built environment. So how might we translate some of that thinking to the natural environment as well?
So I think that we all collectively had to come to terms with ideas about the intersection of these things. So 5 years ago, it would have seemed foreign to imagine that artists or people in medical fields or researchers or naturalists would have some intersection. But I think we all saw the confluence of public health crisis, environmental crisis, racial reckoning, all at once. And we couldn't turn away because we were all stuck in our homes, right? And so I think it's quite obvious now, that kind of intersectionality. I'm from the South Side of Chicago, so my entire life has been trying to understand why a city would allow half of itself to atrophy while the other half thrives. Is getting worse. This is the story of every major US city right now. And so I think that there's an urgency, especially in South Florida, to understand environment as part of that conversation. It's really true everywhere, but we're seeing it with the severity of these things that we took for granted, right? So every storm is a disaster. Every single thing that happens in the kind of built environment is not just the result of inequitable policies, but also the environment saying, you know, this is what happens when you behave in this way, when you don't treat each other with humanity, when you don't understand your connectivity to all of that. So I'm excited that, you know, AIRIE and Tracy and Esther's wisdom of kind of, you know, wanting to expand the mandate of what the organization was, really understood that the narratives that have to come out of that have to come from a wide array, not just diversity for the sake of diversity, but a diverse set of thoughts and worldviews that are really going to expand the way we have to tell that story.
Right. Complicated problems need complicated solutions, right?
And we're all complicated people that can tell really great stories. So if you allow people to tell the stories, actually it all makes sense, right? Like there's a way that we're magical in that way, but also very real. So I think that this is, for me, one of the best examples of how when you let it do what it's supposed to do, it returns multifold.
Well, as a member of AIRIE's National Advisory Committee that selects the finalists, I think you just went through 35 of our 225 applicants to get to the final group. How have you been thinking about that prompt of how to make the outdoors a place of belonging, specifically through an artist residency like ours?
So first of all, I do this a lot, right? These juries, you're clicking through. When I tell you the range and the breadth of the kind of work, from literature to sound to visual arts to sculpture to you name it, I mean, I think it really opened my eyes to the variety of ways that people can either approach this as their life's work, it's something they have been doing, but also, especially Cornelius, Lola, you know, when I saw these ways in which people were imagining, well, how might I use this to leverage or think more expansively about the work that I've already been doing, which is already amazing? I mean, it really just blows you away to understand that when you offer an opportunity of belonging to think about these questions, like it's just explosive. I would say across the board in every jury I've ever been on, the range of people able to kind of take that prompt and really think through, even in the applications, let alone the production of the work, has just been amazing. But again, I think it's a very particular moment that we're in. I don't know if this kind of resonance would have happened in 1990. I don't know what is 2050, but you know, like I think we're in a moment and we're able to really leverage people's capacity and let them do what they do.
And I want to kind of tease out something that you mentioned about people responding to the prompt as in the context of their work, and how that maybe changes more than just a perception around how it is that I produce work. Cornelius, when we've talked about your experience as a AIRIE fellow, that theme kind of comes up quite a bit.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and really kind of first responding to the prompt and being like, the Everglades is a place of belonging, you know, for me was really like, how do I build a connection with this place that is right near me in Miami, but also feels so foreign. It feels like a place that I'd never been to before. I'd been there once. And I really started to investigate. You know, I think the prompt makes you curious in a way that makes you begin to start digging. And for mine, I was really interested and started to see Black histories in the park and that story. And did that even exist there? And once I started digging, it was like Pandora's box opened. You know, there was just so much that hadn't been told, but existed there. It was there, it was present if you search, but it hadn't been delivered. I had never learned that in school. I had never learned that in other spaces, but to see that doing this residency allowed me to find so much history and so much like purpose and place in this space that, you know, I didn't feel connected to, but found out that had so much of the history and stories that even tied to my own identity and heritage, with the connections of spaces like the Saltwater Railroad or the stories of, you know, freed slaves or runaway slaves coming through Florida, going through the Everglades and out to the Caribbean, and seeing that there was this kind of connection and synergy between both South Florida and the Caribbean.
Yeah, one of the phrases that I've heard you use quite a bit is rendering culture visible.
Yeah.
So it very much seems like a theme that perhaps was existent in your work before, but maybe being out in the glades for a little while helped really focus it.
Yeah, and that was the biggest thing. You know, you go to this residency, you're in the Everglades for a month, and you're there by yourself. And a lot of my work previously used subjects around me. It was family, friends, different things. So I was like, how do I begin to tell these stories of these people who this history exists here, but you don't physically see it? And, you know, I was able to kind of really explore through lighting and color how to really turn the environment into a space, which you'll kind of get a little taste of in the installation later, but really being able to show that presence of like humanity, that presence of a history, a story that is untold, but that it's present there. You feel it when you're there. When you're going through the sluice log and the swamps, you really start to think, you know, how do people traverse this environment? How do I convey that as an artist to someone that's just looking at an image of the environment? And I think, you know, I'm able to kind of tease that out through color and lighting and really kind of reimagine the Everglades in a way that for me feels like how that story should have been told.
Thank you. So we'll move to Reverend Houston Cypress. Your family has, suffice it to say, long ties to the land and to the Everglades specifically. Through your many roles as artist, community member, AIRIE board chair, and you also are founder of your own organization. How are you an advocate for the natural world? How are you engaging communities through the arts?
I think that one of the first things I want to start out with is just thinking about the fact that, like, from my Miccosukee upbringing, we have the concept of traditional ecological knowledge. And that tells us that there's a beautiful way of engaging with the energies of nature through song. And in that way, you can really affect reality by singing to nature, by bringing your poems and your art, the best of yourself. And I find a lot of parallels with some of the insights that other knowledge systems like quantum physics can provide to us. Because quantum physics tells us that something so effortless as your gaze, as your attention, can have substantial effects on reality. And so I guess when it comes down to it, it's really about equity, but an equity of knowledge. So when you're out there in the Everglades, when you take artists out there, when you give them the opportunity to connect to these places by field trips, by camping, by meteor shower viewings, the interpretations of the artists, the artworks that's born out of that is something that can help you see the world anew, because I live out there, I grew up out there, and I think I know what's going on. But whenever I see these artworks, these beautiful creations by the artists that AIRIE brings out there, like, I see the world anew. And I think that that's such a powerful way for inspiring, not only inspiring folks, but inspiring action. So whenever you're out there, you see this Cypress dome and it inspires you. Maybe you have a chance to interact with some of the plant medicines and it heals you. So I guess it comes down to, what are we doing to help your friends in nature? And so I think that one of the best things that, the most powerful things that we can do is help artists to connect in whatever ways that they feel interested. Like, what are their interests? Let's help them to connect in that way. So it's about supporting the artists and really connecting to the land and to the elements out there.
Yeah, I just the inspiration of the Cypress Dome. I just have to put a finger on that, because if you guys haven't done a sluice log or a wet hike through the Cypress Dome, it is truly magical. It's definitely a bucket list item. As is visiting the Tree Islands of the Miccosukee out in the Glades, a beautiful place. I want to just off script a little bit, but maybe you could share just a little bit about when you think about Miami communities that don't live in what is now understood as the Everglades, but they're in the urban areas. What are your hopes in relationship to them and the Everglades? What are you hoping for?
I think that I want folks to understand that from here where we are in Wynwood to where I live in the Miccosukee Reservation, in terms of distance, it might be like 45 miles, 50 miles. It might be an hour and a half, depending on this traffic situation. But you are not separate. You are not far. The Everglades is already like with us and among us. Like, this built environment is on top of the aquifer. And whenever you turn on the plumbing, whenever you take your shower or do your cooking, like, these waters are pumped from the aquifer. So basically, we're already always connected to the Everglades by the waters that flow through our community. So, like, that's what I want people to know.
That's so beautiful. I'm going to think about that next time I take a shower.
So one other question for you, Houston. You identify as a two-spirit person. How have you seen indigenous practices of gender diversity inspire action or contribute to these spaces of belonging?
Wow, like, that's a powerful question. It's powerful because a lot of the conflicts that we're seeing in society in our state these days. But you got to remember that this two-spirit movement, this indigenous movement of gender diversity, is pretty new to this region. It's not new to other parts of Turtle Island, not other parts of Abya. But here in South Florida, amongst Miccosukee and Seminole, it's kind of new. But basically, it's about not leaving anybody out. Like, we want everybody in our family, everybody in our community to be part of the conversation. How many of y'all folks here remember the Standing Rock gathering back in 2016? How many of y'all remember that? Awesome. So like that was a movement that brought people together. And when you think about this the Standing Rock situation, I want to point out that even at that event, there was a Two-Spirit direct action camp within the Standing Rock community. And so I want folks to think about the fact that our gender diverse family, our LGBTQ plus friends and family, like they always end up being at the front lines. Y'all know that they were at the front lines of Stonewall. They were at the front lines of Standing Rock. And so I guess what that shows to me is that like we, as gender diverse people, have something to contribute when it comes to matters of life and death. And our LGBTQ friends and family are always the leaders. Stonewall, Standing Rock. And it's the same thing here in South Florida. When it comes to some of the most effective direct actions that we're finding that protect the Everglades, that bring attention to the Everglades, it's the Two-Spirit Seminole people and Miccosukee people that are organizing folks for action in Big Cypress right now to protect against the oil drilling and throughout the overall greater Everglades when it comes to water quality. So it's about making sure everybody's on board and supporting the direct actions that our friends and family are organizing.
Thank you, Houston. Go ahead, give it up. It's all right. Yeah. Now, real quickly, a question for the first three panelists, and any of you could feel free to jump in. So, in terms of creating this space of belonging in the Everglades, what do you see has been accomplished, and where should we be doubling down our efforts?
I think, especially as an artist in AIRIE, I think I always look at it as the artists, we don't necessarily go out there with a specific agenda, but the stories that we tell have so much charge to it, so much history. And when we do communicate that through our artwork, we see how much advocacy that we do just by communicating these stories, just by telling these things and really kind of contextualizing ourselves as making this a place of belonging. You know, people just seeing us out there, going and exploring these spaces. Like people are telling me, like when they come to Miami, they want to go to the Everglades. All these things. My family came, my mom's right there. She came out to the Everglades. And all this space was just like really interesting to kind of see how just being there, being present in these stories and knowing that these things exist there can change that. Because, you know, I never went to the Everglades. I went to the once or twice before, and I'm there all the time. So, you know, you really can see how quickly things can change just by that level of education and communication.
I'll just piggyback on that and a comment that Reverend Houston made. I think it's important, and AIRIE's already doing it, even the kind of stanchion you can see. I think it always has to go beyond just the narrative, and I love the narrative, but it has to turn into policy. So I think that the relationships that already exist make that leap very easy, even having elected officials or folks that are involved already in environment, but also those folks that don't care. So we're the choir. So we need the other folks, right? And so I think it's important to tell the stories. I think it's important to see people that look like you doing things you never did before. But I think it's critical that AIRIE already is starting to have those relationships with people that can move the needle on the funding, on the policy, on the kind of cultural change, so that the people that do not care, I'm sure the baddest actors, right? Like they have to be the converts. And so I think that there's an opportunity to do that on multiple levels.
Right, and I think art plays a particularly unique role in that bit about making people care. I think that's the role that the artists really play here. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. We'll talk about speaking about these different actors in this space. Let's switch gears a little bit here and talk about the role of arts and cultural institutions and the various other players at stake here. Milton, so far the conversation has very much been focused around creating a space of belonging in the natural environment. You're a famed architect. You know about this stuff. How do you think about that notion in the built environment, and also how can we acknowledge the sort of history and continue to create paths forward through the built environment?
Well, thanks. I think it's a great question. It's an honor to be here and really inspiring to hear the discourse about what's happened with AIRIE over the years and what's happening now, and these wonderful panelists to my left and right. I think for me it's been very important to first of all acknowledge the unfinished projects of social movements throughout time, and with our indigenous brothers and sisters and the civil rights movement. There's so many unfinished social movements that are inviting us to pick up the baton and continue those movements. So that's really, for me, as an academic and as an administrator, top of mind in terms of how to create institutional policies and initiatives that address the current conditions, because many of these conditions have been around for a long time. Secondly, I think it's important to recognize that social capital is different, distinct from financial capital. And I think the notion in a capitalist environment is to kind of, think that social capital, or acquiring social capital, is always an effort to acquire more financial capital. And I think social capital in and of itself is meaningful. And I think the kinds of work that AIRIE is doing is really capitalizing on the environment, the natural environment, drawing the talent of artists, and creating meaning and social capital through that dynamic. I think that's a very important intellectual project that's going on here that we should recognize. I think in terms of advancing these things forward, it's very important, I think, for me and all of us in institutions to have both an inside game and an outside game. And so for me, it's been important as a dean to affirm the work of our faculty, but to get outside of our own way in terms of looking beyond. And I was happy to support work at USC Architecture School around very hot environments that are created in people's homes, bus stops, stations, and to appoint someone as head of our Master of Building Science program, not the place that you would think about to talk about climate change, who is really focusing on frontline communities and the heat effect that kills thousands of people per year. That's just one example of an inside the institution making that change. And then he's looking at frontline communities and community organizations that are on the front lines of that movement on the outside of the institution, outside the university. So those are some of the points I would make initially.
Great. Well, I have another question for you, if you don't mind. A lot of arts and cultural organizations represented here, certainly with AIRIE and others around Miami. What sort of questions should we be asking as arts and cultural organizations or environmental advocacy organizations that are also represented here today when it comes to creating equitable space?
Great question. I think the first one is what is the authenticity and the deep commitment to this work over a sustained period of time? We get involved in these cyclical moments of a post George Floyd. We anticipate a kumbaya moment, and those do happen. But I think we also then snap back into the backlash that's inevitable around social movements, and that we have to be more cognizant of anticipating those, even as we celebrate the successes that we all enjoy in the moment as we move through this. So I think that's one. I think equity and diversity are important, and I think part of the problem is we're in this conversation about transformation or abolition, right? Do we abolish institutions, start over, or do we transform the institutions we have because we have the aspiration that we can make them better, we can make them work for everyone? And I think we're gonna have to go institution by institution. And there's some institutions that we will need to deconstruct and put back together. And I think we need to be intentional and transparent about that and inclusive. And there's other institutions where I think we can transform it. And I think there's also the case that institutions that arise, like AIRIE and others, can themselves be force multipliers and disruptors at the same time, developing new models of working, new models, new institutional models, at the same time signaling that some of the other models that others are doing are not working or are not as successful. And then funders, I'm looking to my left, and funders have to follow us on that journey and put resources in institutions that really are making change and detract resources from those that aren't, or those that have historically been funded, because philanthropy is also, embedded with financier and the capital markets and so forth. And so I think they have to follow where the real action, the real authentic movements are taking place, and commit to those even more so.
So speaking of large institutions with, let's say, at times complicated histories, Alexandra, you're situated right now as part of the Smithsonian museums. It's particularly the Smithsonian Institution that's dedicated to design. A number of panelists have commented to this point around the unique circumstances of this particular moment in time, how it feels qualitatively different in some way. How do you see artists, designers being influenced by the natural environment or reacting to the issues faced by climate change and the like, those kind of those issues that are really at the fore right now? How do you see that being reflected in the design world at large?
Thanks for that question, Adam, and I'm really happy to have been embraced by the AIRIE family and to be with all of you here today. Designers create tools, right? But they are also creating systems for connecting people with ideas, information, knowledge. And I really like to talk about a diffuse idea of design. We're thinking about designers who are creating community campaigns and organizing, designers who are creating new and more accessible objects, from the things we sit on to, tools for the kitchen. Designers are transforming communication campaigns and revising the way we receive information. Designers are doing so much, and when I say designers, I don't just mean people who have gone through a formal design education. I mean everyone in this room. We're always designing all the time, and it's something that I think is important to be said. I was reminded, I'm from Miami, and I love to come back here. I was reminded this week, as I've been going around, of this project by two local artists, designers, Jean Moreno, who's also at the ICA now, and Ernesto Arosa, at Objects of Necessity, where they did this documentation of how people created design using the materials they had in their environments. And that's inspirational, right? And I think that sort of feedback between what you might call everyday or citizen designers and sort of shining a light on how we're all designing and redesigning our own worlds, and designers who are coming through academic courses is actually really important, because without that dialogue, I think there starts to develop a disconnect. And that's also how organizations like AIRIE can be impactful, because you have, one foot in the landscape, you have a really particular community, and you're inviting artists and designers to come in and engage directly with this sort of triangulation.
I think that's a good, challenge for us as an organization to continue to sit with and think about how we approach it. How, in your mind, can you share what you've observed in terms of how institutions can create platforms or pathways for artists and designers in, trying to drive those movements towards change?
Right. Well, museums are traditionally responsible for what? Preserving and sharing history and artifacts, right? But why? Why are museums doing that? They're doing that ultimately to try to create progress, to incite conversation, to provoke people to discuss things. And so I think maybe like the how, Milton, you were sort of getting to this, like there was a how that has existed, in the mainstream for a very long time, and that how museums are doing it or how they should be doing it is radically changing right now. And I don't think there is a clear path for that. But one of the most important hows, I think, continues to be, for me, even within the Smithsonian Institution, this idea of porosity, right? And this sort of breakdown of an idea of a capital I institutional narrative, the breakdown of this idea of perfection and that we are providing an answer. And so I think there are many ways that museums like this Smithsonian and other institutions are thinking about being more porous and more open. And that is everything from crowdsourcing research and public scholarship to thinking about coming outside of the museum's walls and creating more public access, to inviting people to propose objects for collections, to supporting local businesses when it comes to even catering and events, to thinking about what the museum can do, how institutional resources can be turned back out into the community. And as a design curator, I think about that a lot in terms of how I can help move design conversations forward and what designers might need from me, and contemporary design curators. So I'm talking to living designers. And so I ask that question a lot, like, what do you need? Maybe I think you want an exhibition, but you don't really want an exhibition, maybe, you're interested in researching and writing something. Maybe you just want to be introduced to someone that I know. And I think not making assumptions, but thinking about reallocating those resources is actually something that museums are doing more and more of, especially sort of the content teams in museums. And hopefully that becomes more of a part of the mission and the vision of institutions all around the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, that's a beautiful idea. And one I think a lot of institutions are actively working towards. So this idea of reallocating resources towards maybe impact-driven work is a good segue to our final panelists here. Ayoka, thanks again for being willing to be with us today on such short notice. You would have been an amazing panelist from the start, so we're happy to have you. Your work in Open Society Foundations deals with artists working locally, doing community-engaged work, and that's impact-driven, including work around climate and environmental justice. So what are some examples about how this looks on the ground? What could you share for us today? What would you like us to know about?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. What I'll say is that Open Society, we view artists through, sort of a multifaceted lens. And I think one of the critical lenses that the first thing I want to say is that we see artists as problem solvers, as and that are driven by solutions, not just creating awareness. I think there's this notion that artists are only creating awareness, and that's not something that we think about, and that they're critical change makers, and that the solutions that they're seeking and that they're driving are also community driven. And so the work is not standalone, and that there's it's multidisciplinary. It's there's multiple stakeholders engaged in that work from the beginning, and so those are the things that we look for. And that they're thinking about advancing multiple issues, including climate change, including environmental justice, and for example, one of the things that we fund and we have since 2018 is our Soros Arts Fellowship. And through the Soros Arts Fellowship, we provide support to individual artists around the world for them to engage in really large-scale global projects, anywhere from 80,000 to 100,000, to expand and advance those work. And I just wanted to give an example. We have some, I have some amazing, incredible examples of how they're doing that, but one of them is an artist who's based in Morocco. His name is Hassani Darcy, and he moved to a small village in Morocco called Beni Aziz, and in particular in that village, there's a forest that is rich with minerals, gold, silver, all kinds of things. And there's some multinational companies, corporate companies, who were coming in and mining in the forest and really just absorbing and destroying the land. And as a result of that, he realized that the land, the communities, the livelihood of that community was under threat. And as opposed to creating, staging protests, going directly to those companies, he organized with the community and built an agriculture, an eco-village within that community. He set a permaculture farm, created and organized with the community sustainable solutions, and also solutions to continue to build revenue for the community. As a result, he also staged protests, he staged arts events in collaboration with the community. As a result of that work, and partnering with local businesses and the community, he was able to convince the government to end the contract so that those multinational companies would stop mining in that community. So that's an example, just one example of where a individual artist has organized directly with the community, using art, using solutions from an environmental justice standpoint to actually make sustainable change in a community where you're dealing with a corporate company that is actually just trying to destroy and has destroyed for many years. And this is a systemic problem all over Africa and in the Caribbean and other places around the world. That's just one. I have multiple, but I'll just stop there.
And thank you. Yeah, and thank you for bringing up an example from Morocco and the notion of artists as problem solvers. It reminds me of a project that's in Detroit where in Morocco they have this architectural feature called the riad, which is this open courtyard, and all the kind of houses are built around the courtyard. It becomes the center of the kind of community. Life happens in this riad. That idea was translated by a group in Detroit with the same notion that perhaps by building a riad on the north side of the city, they could encourage that same type of community connections, and they did so. It's a project called the American Riad. It's actually really cool. It's this kind of metallic structure that creates this covered courtyard between a series of houses, and all of a sudden, the reaction from the community it's off of, I think it's Oakland Avenue is the name of the area there, has been incredible. And they've gotten all sorts of press from it and the like. And so there is this I think in that this notion that yes, artists are problem solvers, and that there is an opportunity for some global kind of knowledge sharing. You are the head of a global program. How many countries do you guys work in again?
We work all around the world, so
right.
Every continent. Yeah.
So the answer is a lot of them. Thinking about that, what do you think are going to be the big and important opportunities over the next 5, 10 years where we could really make a difference here?
Well, to answer your question, where we situate ourselves as a foundation, I sit in the global programs, and within global programs, we've identified several global challenges. And I think in the next 5-10 years, our work will be to have a footprint and make a stamp on solving some of those global problems. They're multifaceted. They involve a number of private and government and community. And so I think over the next 5 years, climate justice is going to be a key priority, climate change. We were just involved in the COP27 conversations with our climate justice team, and so there's a lot of work to be done there. And I think as we continue to engage in these global challenges, we're going to have to think about how we disrupt so many narratives around authoritarian governments that are rising up, and conversations in the people that, it's government, but it's also these smaller, if you will, smaller groups that are creating very hurtful and pervasive narratives. And they're around all issues. So, but one of the things is that they create illusions, and that there's a disillusionment that these things don't exist. So we all know that the narrative is that climate justice is not real, or that there's not a climate problem, or that there's not an environmental justice problem. So when you create those illusions that things aren't real, you have to create more spaces for alternative narratives, and to create the sort of, the realities of what actually is existing.
So I mean, a great thing that the purview of perspective and illusion is something that artists play with all the time. So I guess there's a little bit of hope there. We have just a few minutes left. So in these last few minutes, I'd like to give all the panelists an opportunity to say in just a few sentences, what sort of message you'd like this group here to leave with. You can do your plugs, whatever sort of obligatory plugs you want to do, and we'll start from the top.
I just want to reiterate. I mean, you all have done a beautiful job of kind of letting each person flow into the next one. And I think for me, the thread that kind of binds these things are about disruption, and I love this idea of multiple knowledge systems, so that nature, growing up, right? Nature is like the neutral thing that makes everybody happy, right? And so it was like jarring to me when I realized that all space is not the same. And so I think we all know that now. So it's incumbent upon each one of us to figure out that way in which we really are going to be more than awareness building, and not just feel good about artists making us feel good about thinking about these things, but that we advocate for that, and that we also, as Milton beautifully put it, like maybe you got to go away. Maybe you are the problem. So if you're the problem, get yourself together or move out of the way. So that's how I'm coming. So if you're coming at me, I'm
Quote.
coming at you.
And I'd like to add really on the side that, like, for each of us mentioning it, it's all about community. I think we think not just artists, yes, we're storytellers, but it takes the support of everyone. It takes us collaborating. And I think that's a big component, whether it's an organization, it's an individual, it's multiple artists, to really see that all of us play a part in telling these stories and also making change.
All right. I have two plugs. One of them is an up-and-coming nonprofit organized by a Miccosukee artist, and the nonprofit is called Voices of the River of Grass. Find them on Instagram. And then the second one is that there's an actionable item that we can take right now to save Big Cypress, which is encouraging the Department of Interior to authorize the sale of the mineral rights underneath that land. See me for more details. But thank you very much.
Again, thank you for having me, and I feel just honored to be here. I think one of the things I'd encourage this group, all of you, and others to do is continue to engage architects and those in spatial practice to be a part of these conversations. When I was dean at the School of Architecture at USC, when I came in, I said, we're going to train citizen architects. And I'll be writing more about that, but I think it's important to expand the notion of what architects are, what they can do, what they should be doing to transform both the field, the practice, academia. And so that's very important to me. And I'm also since some plugs were made, I'll be starting a new academic journal magazine focused on culture, arts, architecture, and underrepresented voices called Critical Productive. And I hope you'll join me to support that when it launches next year. Thank you.
You know, Cornelius, you said collaboration. That's something that continues to come up. I think, you know, when you have a mix of people within art, design, environmental fields, like you have right now on stage, it's important for us and also for an audience to hold us to task, right? And to expect us to work with each other, right? Not just in our own universes, but to collaborate and try to use our resources, our access to try to move conversations forward. And, you know, I want to underline like that individual activism. You know, museums are looking at what audiences want. Foundations are looking at what audiences want. We're in a time where there's more exposure than ever to ideas, and it is difficult sometimes to sort of, you know, parse out, you know, where the depth and the richness and the authenticity lies. But you know, we have voices and we have power, and we should use them. And we're all looking to you to help us along the way. So use your voice. I'm sorry, that sounds like a 1990s inspirational campaign, but I'm feeling apparently very moved by the conversation. So that's what I've got.
I'll just say two things. One, just thinking about the topic, which is land and lineage. The land and the water have memory. The land and the water have ancestral memory. And it's our responsibility as a community, as humanity, to reimagine those memories, to reinvent those memories, and to heal those memories. And the earth and the land and the water are counting on us to do that. I just wanted to lift that up. The second thing I want to do, I wouldn't be doing due diligence to my colleague Tatiana Morbez, who's leading the Soros Arts Fellowship, is we're going to be starting our upcoming new cycle for 2023. For individual artists who are interested, we will focus on art, land, and public memory, and the realities of climate change, and a re-examination of the relationships to public space, land, and the physical environment. And so we encourage individual artists who are interested in that to apply and to see me or Tatiana. Thank you again.
All right, everybody. Now let's have a big, big, big round of applause for our panelists, Amanda Williams, Cornelius Tulloch, the Reverend Houston Cypress, Milton Curry, Alexandra Cunningham Cameron, and Ayoka Wiles. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up.